Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Die with Steve Beynon. Hopefully, somewhat quiet. You're not picking up the police helicopter that's deciding to fly over my house at noon for some reason. Those guys
Yeah.
just love it. It's like they know I'm going to podcast, so they're just like, let's shake the entire pod shack by just hovering for a minute.
Well, hey, you know what? We're in the work from home culture, and like sound can get crazy really fast. My dogs might lose their shit here any moment when my wife walks in.
It could be that the St. Louis Police Department is just trying to recreate my experiences overseas by having a helicopter fly over me at all times. So just to piss me off. As
If
the
you get
black,
raided, that'll be great content.
it would be very funny if the police helicopter tried to land in my backyard because there's just, I mean, I live in the city, so there's not there's not a helicopter pad for it. I'm gonna can't slice off the entire top half of the pod shack with a rotor blade. It's fine. It's fine. My chair sits real low. We'll be all right. Steve, I brought you on because, as always, I love to bring on my journalists and talk about kind of the things that they're writing about. The big one that perked me up and I really wanted to kind of delve into is this one that you released back on the 1st of December. Army quash deal with Call of Duty after video games publisher faced harassment scandals. So I'm a fan of Call of Duty. I understand it's problematic. I don't care. I get to shoot people in the face with a variety of made up guns. It's whatever.
Yeah, it's laser tag. It's fun.
Yeah, you go on. Every time I go on, there seems to be somebody who's like blaring music into their headphones and yelling at a kid of some kind for some reason, and completely negates the entirety of the communications that you're supposed to have, so you can tell each other what you're doing. But the Army, loves to. I mean, obviously, the Army and the military in general is involved in the making of all these things because propaganda is insidious and all around you. But also, it makes the gun sounds, a lot more correct rather than having to make it up. Which
the guns sound good.
Yeah, when you're a huge gun nerd, I'm not really that, but I do know the difference between an AK-47 and a M16. So I appreciate the attempts that are being made here. But apparently, Call of Duty, the publisher, who is this? Blizzard? Yeah, Activision Blizzard.
Yes.
Yeah, they are having gender discrimination and sexual assault lawsuits that have been coming out since last year, really, and honestly for a long time. The Activision and Blizzard have always been hotbeds of being complete assholes. So my curiosity here is like, what? Because I mean, it's the Army. Like the Army doesn't usually care about things like this. So why are they pulling out of this?
So that's actually part of what made this newsworthy. And this is a part of my infinite curiosity about the Army of when they choose to care about certain things and when they choose to not to. If them having this deal or pulling out or not pulling out is something that if they kept in the deal, I don't think that would be newsworthy. I don't know if I'd write about a relatively, I mean, this is in terms of the scale, this is a $7 million deal that had Call of Duty at the center. But when you think about the Army and how much it spends and how much it spends on marketing, this is just, I mean, it's a rounding error for the Pentagon. So to kind of rewind a little bit, Activision Blizzard is gaming's largest publisher by a long shot. They oversee the Call of Duty franchise that has been the top of gaming for 20 years now, like hit after hit. Every single year it comes out. This new Call of Duty that came out, made $1 billion faster than Top Gun Maverick. And just the scale of that franchise is very hard. I mean, the closest thing you can get to is probably the Marvel Cinematic Universe in terms of its ubiquity. And when you think about the Army and how it has to do marketing now, the kids, they're not watching TV. They're not on Facebook, and the DoD is not really allowed to advertise on TikTok. So the Army has to get really creative of how it markets. And so if you're, planning marketing, you go, I can't get on TikTok. What's the next best thing? Where are the kids? And where are the kids that might be interested in service? Call of Duty is the very obvious place to go.
Absolutely. Everybody who plays Call of Duty and is really good at it, those skills 100% translate to
Mhm.
your regular deployment. The period of time that you sit waiting in the lobby for the game to start. Do
Mhm.
that for 8 hours and then just die.
Yeah.
That's the deployment experience.
Yeah. So I mean, the army's been increasingly looking into video games. Like I said, so they had this year they had a $7 million deal that had Call of Duty at its center, but that included a lot of things. It included advertising on sites like IGN, which is a big gaming news site, and G4, which people try to resurrect into a channel, and it died really quickly. But a lot of it was like esports advertising, and the money that went straight to Activision Blizzard was $750,000 sponsoring kind of the Activision Blizzard official esports team, the Call of Duty. In addition to that, the Army is also sponsoring various streamers out there. Some getting six figures, so they'd be streaming playing their Call of Duty. Maybe they mentioned the Army's cool or something like that, and that's what the kids are watching. They're not if they're not watching TikTok again, which the Army can't really be on. They're watching video game streamers. There's tens of thousands of people watching them at a time, and that's where the eyes are, and that's where the Army went.
Now, the Army and the military in general were fielding esports teams for a while. It felt like they kind of got chased off, but they're back again. They've got a U.S. Army esports team. I guess they stopped having an open Discord where everybody could come ask them about war crimes. Which had I been part of this planning thing, it's like, guys, don't just let any jackass in. They're gonna accuse you of war crimes, because that's what I would do.
They kind of had their official Twitch, and they still do things, but they've definitely scaled that back a little bit. So now you're probably going to see more general sponsors of other streamers and things that are less directly the Army. Maybe a stream or something featuring the Army, but maybe not 10 guys in uniform playing Smash Brothers.
Which hey, if I, talk about a choice deployment that I would have taken.
Yeah, I mean they do have their own. I mean the Army still has their esports team. It's at Fort Knox. It's pretty wild. But when you think about they're part of the Army marketing apparatus as opposed to the Army football team, which is part of the West Point apparatus. These esports soldiers, I guess you would call them. They have other regular MOSs. I've talked to a couple of them over years. There's still mechanics and admin people and chaplain's assistants and infantrymen or whatever that go into this for whatever reason, and they do compete, and they're apparently not too shabby.
But I feel like they'd probably be better. Like in that scene in 300 where Leonidas is asking the Greeks what their jobs are, and then he's just he turns to the Spartans and is like, "What is your job?" And they all just grunt at him. They should have that. If you want to be the best esports, you got to stop fixing trucks, and you need to go start fixing your fucking stack teams when you're running around the Mexican border, I guess.
I watched a documentary or some news segment. It's something a long time ago about competitive StarCraft players, and they would literally train for 12 hours a day, and they would literally have boxes of keyboards and mice next to their desks, and they would like toss out the old mouse, plug in the new one because they just needed fresh equipment all the time. That's how intensely they were. I don't know if the Army is going that far. I don't know if some private has just a stack of 360 controller or Xbox controllers next to him.
Yes, but they all cost $500.
What's the department?
You got to flip it over. Well, it's the problem is that they're only getting the Xbox controllers that come with the little bomb robots, so they're not getting. It's like, hey, I have a second N64 controller, and it's got like weird buttons that you've never seen, and it's some
off-brand Korean controller that's wired.
Something is like, oh, this is from Kazakhstan. Cool.
But they cost $800 a piece because of some Defense Department contract.
When you plug it in, you get super malware on in your computer and everything. It's great. It's fantastic.
But yeah, going to what actually happened here, the Army is still maintaining a lot of their video game contracts. They're only getting rid of the money that went directly to Activision Blizzard. So part of the $7 million kind of game plan they had for video games, $750K was going directly to Activision Blizzard, and that stems from a lot of controversy the company has been in over the past couple of years, namely gender discrimination. There's been a lot of great reporting, particularly out of the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg, that have detailed numerous like employee walkouts and effectively the state of California is in the middle of suing the company for gender discrimination. Women are allegedly promoted slower. They're more likely to be fired or terminated. They're getting paid less than the males there. And there's a lot of issues with sexual harassment and even sexual assault. One woman settled out of court with the company alleging she was raped twice by a supervisor. And, the Army is going through this phase where they are at least pretending to care about sexual assault. They haven't really done anything. They haven't put out any policies out, but they talk about it a lot and at least want to look like this is a priority for them. And they pulled out because they don't want to be associated with Activision Blizzard. And this sort of gets into why I thought it was newsy, because of all the things the Army chooses to do and choose not to do. They pulled out of what is relatively a small deal and something that nobody would have found out about. We only found out about it because I guess Vice requested the documents too, but I got some stuff sent to me from a source detailing the deal falling apart.
Well, more power to him. Don't stop giving money to the Activision in general. I say as I'm probably going to play fucking Call of Duty later on today. But it is so. I mean, really, all this is all over like even less than $1 million.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
That $7 million that's been earmarked, that's still going to go to all of the streamers to talk about how great the Army is. It's just not going directly to Activision itself.
Yeah, the Army still has its finger in Call of Duty, but just not directly with Activision Blizzard. There's still going to be streamers that focus on Call of Duty. There's these video game sites with a lot of Call of Duty articles and ads tied to algorithms that are also associated with Call of Duty that the Army wants to get in. But just what the Army tells me is no money will be spent on Call of Duty, but no money will be given to Activision Blizzard.
Well, I certainly see their logic here. It's really not helping out to just be like, well, we're not going to give money directly to you guys, but we are going to give your money to all these people who promote exactly, the kind of games that you do, because we still need our finger in the pie, but just not as close to your fingers anymore.
And far be it from me, I gotta give credit where credit is due, because I'm almost paid to complain about how bad the Army's messaging is. It's so atrocious, right? They almost I can't tell if they do it on purpose sometimes. But you kind of got to think from their position here, right? Call of Duty is a very clear pathway to the kinds of people the Army wants to recruit. And again, going back to the Army doesn't have a lot of options to talk to young people. And they gave me a comment on the record saying they don't want to work with video gaming's biggest publisher right now that has the biggest game that is played by the exact demographic they want to court. And you would assume like maybe this blows over one day. And in, down the road, 5-10 years, I could see them doing business with Activision Blizzard, but they have that quote out on the record, calling them out, saying we don't want to be associated with them. And I gotta give the Army credit on that one.
Yeah, they're trying. I mean, that is better than it has been in the past. Now, like what the Army does, they're still doing it proxy, and thinking that nobody notices it, but obviously, you're not exactly not doing business with them if you are saying, "Hey, you guys that play this game and promote it a lot, can we give you money? We're just not going to give the people who made the game money." And somehow, in our logic, that makes sense.
Yeah, and to kind of giving the Army credit. With that said, that comes with a giant caveat, right? Some of the documents I saw basically so. The initial concern internally the Army had, there's an email that shows this, where when it was initially brought up, the issues with Activision Blizzard was brought up because a reporter from The Verge asked the Army after California's lawsuit, hey, are you still going to do this partnership with Call of Duty? Activision Blizzard is involved in all this controversy. And that is what spurred them to kill the deal. It was an inquiry from a reporter. So they did what I think a lot of people would consider is the right thing, the smart move. But like everything that happens in the military, you can trace a lot of it back to it's because a reporter asked a question.
Yeah. I did notice with some of your articles, as you discussed in your thread of your favorite things, where like the high school diploma, where they're like, we don't need a high school diploma, and then military.com comes out with hey, the Army's not requiring high school diplomas, which like if you stop the requirement, obviously it's like one would think, wouldn't you want to say, hey, everybody without a high school diploma, we'll take you now? It seems like that would be good. Like if you thought it was a good idea in the first place, then you should be happy that a journalist is asking questions about it. But the immediate reversal on that, like a week later, no, 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 no. And I do wonder, like, is there like a handful of soldiers who got in that week who's just like, yes, sweet, I'm going to get in without my GED and without my high school diploma, and then the door slams shut again.
Something about press coverage really scares them. They could have all these great ideas, and sometimes like the Army legitimately will have good ideas, but they're just so scared of coverage for some reason. I go back to the story I wrote a couple weeks ago about the 25th Infantry Division in Hawaii. They put out a new policy that says, hey, if you're pregnant, you can leave the barracks much earlier than previously. It was I don't have it in front of me, but it was like weeks earlier. It's an objectively great policy, and it was leaked to me. And I don't like saying leaked because that suggests I got some like damning information that's going to get someone fired. And then that's just one of those examples of just like, why did the Army not want to show this off? And it's just, they have this weird fear of the press and things that they think are good ideas, like the high school thing that went through somebody, right? Somebody important said,
through
okay.
A lot of people.
But the second it's written down on paper, they're like, shit, never mind.
Well, that guy with that middling podcast is yelling at us. We must we got to stop doing this.
Yeah, and actually about to caveat on the high school thing, it didn't seem like, it sounds goofy up front. I think they were definitely scared of like they got scared off because everyone on the internet was making fun of them. But if you read the details of it, it only applied if you scored in the upper 50th percentile on the ASVAB scores, right?
You still had to prove you're smart.
You still had to prove yourself. So, I mean, that kind of makes sense. Like, there might be a lot of reasons someone didn't finish high school, but like if you score in the 50th percentile, like you definitely did good on the test. And if you qualify for an MOS, you qualify for an MOS. I mean, we can go back and forth on should you finish high school, but they academically qualified for service, and they actually had to hit a higher benchmark than other people.
Yeah, you got to be smarter than the infantry guy with the high school diploma.
Yeah, no, exactly. So it wasn't just like, I think they were scared of the headline, not the story. The headline is, and I don't know how I should write the headline. The headline is, hey, you don't need a high school diploma anymore, with caveats, yada, yada, yada. But, we live in a society where people don't read past the headline. That's all the Army sees.
Well, and as you said, good ideas do kind of stem up for them. The pre-basic training thing is a really good idea. Hey, if you're not physically or mentally like good enough to get into the Army, we'll help you along with that. However, then the Navy is really trying to bring back McNamara's brigade. The
Navy's they're down with the dum-dums coming in. Like that is 10th percentile. That, I mean, I don't even know what MOS you'd even qualify for.
I mean, probably, when you try to become a Navy SEAL and you fail out, and they're like, well, you're going to scrub toilets for the rest of your career. I guess they're just trying to fill those in. Maybe all the Navy SEAls are instead getting out and writing books.
And the pre-basic training, this is something. So I was talking to General McConville the other day, and he legitimately loves this idea.
Yeah,
right.
It's great,
and it makes a lot of sense, right? So there's a lot of issues with what's going on in recruiting, but really what's at the center of it is Americans are just overweight. That is the biggest issue, right? And so if you try to join, and you can't come in being like a total slob, right? It's your 2-3, I think the max is like 4% beyond what you're allowed to have. And you go to this course and you can be there for up to 90 days and you lose 4% of your body fat. You can go on to basic training. And it just kind of makes sense. And they've graduated more than, they've graduated a couple hundred people at this point. That's a couple hundred people that would have never been in the Army. And the same with the ASVAB, people that came up kind of short can go get some tutoring, retake it, go move forward to basic training. ASVAB scores, for some reason, I don't know if anyone's really figured it out, but they're much lower than they were years ago. There's something going on there where people are just not testing out very well. And then Americans are getting more and more overweight. And this seems to be something that might help on the margins. I don't think it's going to solve the Army's recruiting crisis, getting 20,000 extra people in the door, but it's definitely going to help out.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of there is no if we hit this switch suddenly, recruiting and retention is gonna work again. Because I see the arguments about like, well, if there was free healthcare for all Americans, would that hurt recruiting? Like recruiting, no, because 18-year-olds don't care about health insurance, but retention, when that 18-year-old turns into a 24-year-old and is thinking about starting a family, then yeah, if you can get out and not go out into the field for months at a time and leave his family behind, he's probably going to do that.
Yeah, and that's what the Army's doing on recruiting. It's a lot of these like things on the margins. Like they've eased their tattoo policies. I mean, again, that's not going to really solve your problem, but that's going to get maybe a couple dozen extra folks in the door. You got the pre-basic training stuff, and
they started letting you wear white socks with boots. I mean,
yeah.
There's been so many, there's been so many. There have been like not just for recruiting and retention, but I will hand it to Sergeant Major of the Army Grinston and his just like, I don't care what socks you're wearing. Like that's not important. What's important is, can you do your job? Can you run? Can you do the PT test? Can you do the things that you need to do to be a soldier to win the fight or whatever? Like your socks don't matter. He was the first sergeant major of the Army who didn't give a shit if you were standing on his grass or not, because he's just like, you're on my grass? Cool. Let's do some military movements or something. I do wonder though, because he's very forward thinking. They've relaxed a lot of hair standards as well for women in the military. We've got a new sergeant major of the Army coming in, and
yes,
a Green Beret. What's your read on this guy?
Yeah, so this is Command Sergeant Major Michael Weimer, who is currently the top enlisted leader of SOCOM. And there's a lot of concerns I'm hearing. Nothing about him personally. I haven't heard anything like really necessarily bad about him from people that work with him. People that work with him, I mean, mind you, we just found out who he is. I mean, I'm not going to act like I've talked to a ton of people that worked with him, but they all, so far, 4 or 5 people I've talked to so far say he's a great NCO. But don't hold me to that. I'm going to talk to more people. Maybe that changes. But as far as I know, no issues. But it's the idea of a Green Beret effectively running the Army. And folks that your policy nerds are going to say the SMA doesn't run the Army. True, but like, yeah, I mean, they're the public image of the Army. They kind of dictate the tone and what's going on. And they're also the most visible with the press. So like their engagements with me will inform a lot of my reporting and sort of what stories end up getting done based on what they're doing and talking about. But the concern with the Green Beret, it goes a couple different directions. So the first question everyone always asks, what's going on with beards? And, maybe the Green Beret is like, yeah, screw it, have your beard. It could also go the complete opposite direction of, hey, I go to selection in your damn beard. I don't know which way he's going to go. I asked if he'd be interested in an interview. He is not interested in talking to the press at this time. But special forces soldiers, they're not in the real Army. I mean, anyone that served knows there is a difference between being in special operations and the conventional garrison Army. And he's worked probably almost exclusively with males and that real kind of alpha environment. And I am skeptical of, is he going to talk to me about ponytails and breastfeeding? Is that an issue that's going to be even on his radar? Or is he going to be, about shoot, kill, which the SMA has more things to worry about, more soldiers to care about than just those door kickers.
Right. Yeah, because despite popular belief, most people in the Army are not really combat oriented. We have a lot of combat MOSs, and you might see combat, but you're not, like you said, you're not the door kicker. And as soon as I saw Green Beret, I was like, oh, good, war crimes are back. But to be fair, they never really went away, did they? But
Grinston was really good about interlacing, like, and one of those stories I shared on my thread was a profile I wrote about him. He gave me really great access. I hung out with him for basically a week. Went with him to Bragg and Fort Belvoir, and they let me sit in like meetings with him and like really got to see him work and like learn about who he is. And he does a really good job of interlacing the combat needs of the Army and the personnel needs of the Army. And I think that's what made him successful. He was the hype man for the ACFT, the new fitness test. Like he didn't invent the test. The test was long in development before he came around, but that became his baby, right? And then he was a huge champion of making badges a really big deal, expert badges, and got the expert soldier badge kind of like through the finish line and like really hyped that up, and got land navigation back into basic leaders course, the school you need to go to become a sergeant. So the combat readiness part is a huge thing for him. But also he was really glued in on personnel issues, things that seem small on paper, like ponytails for women, right? Or breast pumping policies, right? He like really championed that stuff behind the scenes and understood the bigger picture of if soldiers are just more comfortable and we can make their lives just a tiny fraction easier, they're going to be more combat effective. And that's something he saw and was able to execute pretty well.
Well, congratulations to the first guy who realized that. Because my career in the Army, it's always been shut up. You're going to do what you did. You signed the dotted line, so we get to own you for 6 years. Shut the fuck up. Go live in your moldy barracks.
Yeah, yeah, and kind of the point of that profile I wrote about him. I mean, he was basically the man was made in a sergeant major factory, right? He's he's totally down. He wants to get us better at killing bad guys, take care of the soldiers, clean as can be too, right? Like I've looked into him more than I've looked into anyone else. The worst thing anyone's ever said about him is he was kind of an asshole when he was in E6, E7, which, who wasn't in peak GWAT, right?
Yeah.
Combat Arms E7 and peak GWAT, like who wasn't a dick?
Yeah.
I
was a PAO E6 and I was a dick, man. It's what you do when you're in E6, E7. And to be fair, you're supposed to get worse when the higher you go.
Yeah, so I am very skeptical about how someone who's a Green Beret, clearly a decorated guy, Purple Hearts, Valor Awards, probably a rock star of a soldier, but how does he integrate taking care of the conventional force and making it an army for everybody, and also coming from that special operations environment, which is not known for transparency. The current SMA, Grinston, is very open with the press. Him and his team are great. How is this guy going to be open with the press and Congress and advocates and every other stakeholder?
Right. It also does seem very strange to pick somebody like this when we are a peacetime army. In essence, we don't have any large. Obviously, we still do stuff all over the place, but we don't have any large scale operations happening. Why pick a combat oriented guy for something like this when, and not to say that Grinston should stick around, go do what you will, go retire, but it just seems odd to have this kind of pivot. But I don't really know anything about the guy, so
yeah. Again, I mean, they don't want to do press on him yet. I think they want to give Grinston just kind of his last year, and have Weimer kind of focus on SOCOM. So, I mean, hopefully we'll be able to chat with him in a couple of months at some point and report back on what his plans are for the Army.
Yeah, see if you can get him to explain what the hell's going on at Fort Bragg and why everybody keeps getting murdered down there.
Yeah, that's an issue. That's on.
Before you come clean up here, why don't you stop? Why don't you stop having like your troops show up and dead inside of burned out cars or something? Mm-hmm. Maybe just once.
Yeah, definitely a problem.
All right, Steve. So what else have you put out this year that you're real proud of?
I think the story this year is actually, if I can make a detour, I did interview that guardsman that did some basically over the phone tech support for Ukrainians in the middle of gunfights to help them with their javelins. Going back to the Army communications, like I found that guy. It's my job as a reporter to find him, but I feel like some PAO should have thrown him through my window and forced me to interview him because it's such a good story, right? For the Guard. Like, are you kidding? You went overseas, you trained these guys how to use javelins a year ago, and now they're using them, and they fucked up. They forget how it works, and they call him, and he's talking to them, and they're blowing up Russian tanks while he's on the phone with them. Like that doesn't get more badass.
He gets to call those as his kills. Like,
I asked him in the story. He takes credit for 6 Russian tanks getting blown up.
Hey, good for him.
But I think the big story this year was, mold. It's an issue people read about a lot. It's not a new story per se, but that issue at Bragg and that relocation was absolutely game changing for the Army in the sense that A senior NCO made an anonymous complaint to the Army Secretary. Army Secretary dispatches people to include Grinston, who we just talked about, and I actually accompanied him during that inspection. They find that at least 12 of those buildings were absolutely unlivable. They were set to be demolished in 5 years. They accelerated that timeline to next year, moved all these soldiers out. That was a shit show, but it's one of those situations of like, well, what do you do, right? So now soldiers are spread all over the place. About 400 of them got BAH, 400 unmarried soldiers. And then that trickled down to soldiers of Fort Stewart reaching out to me because their perspective was, hey, if you think Bragg is fucked up, look at my barracks, right? And that's probably the most well-sourced story I've ever written. I probably talked to 30, 40 soldiers. They're doing FaceTimes with me, taking me on barracks tours. I saw one hallway that was black, not because it's painted, but it was just mold. It looked like Katrina just went through there. And so that story came out. And then the 3rd ID garrison commander told me he thinks everything's fine. He doesn't need additional resources. I was asking them, hey, man, it takes 5 years to build barracks. Do you need extended timelines? Do you need more workers? Do you need more cleaning supplies? Like what the hell do you need? And he said he's fine. And so that signaled to me that garrison leadership is just totally indifferent on this issue, or at least at Fort Stewart and the 3rd Infantry. And then that story led us to the Army issuing an order for all of its buildings, not just barracks, all of its buildings, thousands of buildings. All of them need to be inspected at the time by November. That was an aggressive timeline. It was like 5 weeks to look at all their buildings. So they extended that to January. So I'm excited to see what their findings were. That was a clear example of a small story. SMA visits Fort Bragg. Soldiers get moved out of Bragg. Bragg buildings get demolished. Stewart's fucked up. And then the service going, we need to just look at all of our buildings because I don't think they really do it. And they don't catalog those issues very well. Mm-hmm. And then stemmed in, sorry, one last thing. And that stemmed into the Army Secretary talked to the president, right? She's saying, hey, I have $1 billion a year to unfuck these barracks. It's not enough money, right? There's a CBO report saying that basically if you fixed all the barracks issues, it's going to cost at least about $30 billion, right? So the Army is now publicly admitting, or at least telling Biden, we don't have enough money to fix this problem. And that is one of the situations of no duh, but I don't think that's ever actually been put on paper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not official until somebody writes it down and puts it in front of somebody else. Like we've all known, but nobody wrote it down.
Yeah.
And I feel like also Haley had a lot of really good. Haley Britsky had a lot of good reporting on the Red Hill fuel leak, and there's a lot of like those kinds of stories that constantly keep coming up, and somebody keeps talking about them. Those are the ones that the Army's just like, fine, fuck it, let's go take a look at it. Like, oh, actually, this is a huge problem.
Yeah. I mean, I think I said this last time I came on. Like this, I mean, it's not me tooting my own horn. People don't have to come to me. Pick your reporter of choice. But these issues need to be brought up to reporters for us to ask them about and to write about, because that is just the only way. Like it sucks, but we don't live in a world where a specialist with a moldy room can just go to the 2-star and say, "Hey, sir, my room's fucked up." Like no one cares about him.
I was told the general had an open door policy.
Well, he doesn't. Well, the specialist complaining is at least not going to siphon off billions of dollars for barracks remodel projects. Yeah, and also, hey, shout out to Haley since you mentioned her. She moved on. She's now working at CNN covering national security. So big move on her part.
So the last thing that I kind of want to talk about, and I talked about this with Nicholas Slayton as well. But I'm gonna kind of bring it up with you too because you are in the military. The COVID vaccine is no longer going to be required, but everything else is still, right?
Yeah. So they got the Congress basically they got language into the NDA, the National Defense Authorization Act, that basically funds and sets policy for the Pentagon to remove the COVID vaccine mandate. And I think a lot of that was Democrats just not wanting to die on the Hill for the vaccine. And it sort of makes sense. And then I'll go into why it doesn't make sense. So why it makes sense is, hey, most troops, sorry, I always speak in Army terms. Most troops were vaccinated in early 2021. We don't know for sure, but when I checked in on the CDC, the estimation for that initial vaccines to like work is about a year. So we're past that, and boosters aren't mandated. So if you just got those initial vaccines in early 2021, it begs the question is like, are you even vaccinated anymore? Right? Does it count? And there's not really a clear answer for that. There's just estimations. And most people are vaccinated anyway. It's like 99% of the force is vaccinated. And so if you're uh, a Democrat on the Hill, you look at this issue and you go, okay, most military people are relatively young, they're relatively in shape, and they're just not at risk of getting the worst impacts of COVID. And most of them are vaccinated anyway. It's such a small amount of people that complain about this. Screw it. Let Republicans have the win so we can get just this bill passed and just get it through and not have to fight. We'll give them this so they don't fight us on other stuff. That kind of makes sense. What doesn't make sense is, or what the problems could be, is this sets a potentially really terrible precedent where are the vaccines like really necessary for military members? Probably not if you look at the kind of people who usually get really sick. But we know the right really politicized the vaccines for whatever reason, right? They threw a temper tantrum over it, and we ceded to the toddler throwing a temper tantrum, right? And this sets a precedent to where like anytime they throw a fit and they like really coordinate that fit, they're gonna get what they want if they hold Pentagon funding hostage. And that is the problem. I see it.
Yeah, I would also say that not having our people get vaccinated, and to be fair, we have a yearly flu vaccine that comes out, and the flu vaccine is mandated every year. Every year soldiers have to get it, or troops have to get it. But currently with COVID, and this is just, I understand it in the way, like, as you explain it, like what's vaccinated and what isn't. Like, obviously I have to get a flu shot every year because the flu changes and it has variations and everything like that. If you want to mandate a yearly vaccine, we need to have a yearly vaccine, which we don't have. And I don't really even know, like, going forward, are we, like, I'm vaccinated and boosted twice. Are we going to continue to have these boosters, or are they going to turn into regular vaccines? Is this going to become an endemic thing? Like, it's just a lot of like, don't really know until we're not going to know until we know.
Yeah, it's really hard to argue for the vaccine mandate if you are not mandating boosters. That is where I think it starts falling apart.
Right. And this is the difference between, like we said, is my yearly flu shot a vaccine or a booster? What kind of language are we using here? And if this is a boost and a boost and a boost, and we keep doing that because we keep, creating these vaccines for the different variants that pop up, because it's a virus, it's always going to do that. It's the same thing. I mean, it's the same concept as the flu. It's just we're calling this a booster instead of a vaccination. So I get, like, just the way that this current vaccine plus boosters, how it works. Like, we just don't have a yearly thing that we have yet. So maybe in a couple of years, if COVID continues to be an endemic issue, it would become something. Just kind of sneak it in with the flu shot, just kind of mingle it all together, and then nobody's going to have a problem with it, right?
Yeah,
that's how it works.
Yeah. And again, this is just an issue of Republicans politicizing medicine. Their argument, and they truly believe it, I think, or at least some of them, because I've talked to a couple sources in the Army and stuff like that have had private correspondence with Republican staffers on the Hill, and they at least like seem to really believe like this really hurt. This is the problem with recruiting, and that just isn't the case. Like, there's no 17-year-old that wants to go get some in the 82nd Airborne and is just, I'm not going to get a shot, so I'm just going to change my entire career life. I'm just going to go to college, I guess, and become an accountant. Like that person doesn't exist.
Yeah. And I do notice when I look at the Reddit military FAQs, it seems like every third question is something about getting around Genesis, which really seems
that is the issue. Yeah.
That's the big Army stepping on its own dick, because when I joined in 2000, actually 1999, I joined 2000. No, I joined.
That's back in the day. A recruiter told you to shut the fuck up about your past health issues.
Yeah, he said if they can't prove anything,
that was the original "don't ask, don't tell" policy.
Yeah, they're like, what can they prove? They can prove. They can't prove that you is like. Well, should I tell them that I experimented? Like, they can't prove anything. Tell them nothing. Yeah. No, you've never smoked weed. No, you've never had these problems. If you have epilepsy? No, you don't. Unless you're like worried about having a seizure, then don't fucking tell them and we'll figure it out later. And now there's this big, computer system that is like every time you fucked up in your past, or anytime that you were like, hey, I need, some mental or physical or emotional help, that's going to count against you for joining the army of all places.
Yeah. Anyone who broke a toe in wrestling practice in middle school, or anyone that took aspirin,
Right.
it's a problem now.
If you took aspirin and wrote it down, then we're gonna have to get a waiver from somebody. Now, and this is the same army that will break you in half and put you back together. And when you say, "Wow, everything hurts," they say, "Yeah, here's 30%. Go fuck off." So I would think that, they would want to bring more people in and stop asking the questions of the past. But like, yeah, that Genesis program really seems to be the thing that has caused the issue. Like, there are only a few like old school beliefs that I hold about the military, and one of them is that it kind of should be a clean slate. Like, you've turned 18. I knew a lot of people in the army who, some of them, it was the judge said jail or the military, which I don't think is technically legal, but, judges are going to do what they do. But there were also plenty of just like, yeah, I had a fucked up childhood. I came here to get away from those things because the army will get me away from them. It's like, yeah, I get it. And that is great. I'm glad that you're no longer running around gangbanging. I'm glad that you're not in these terrible, horrible situations. And just the idea that somebody could be told like, no, you broke your leg a while ago when you were 16, and now that you're 18, we don't think your leg is good enough. Like, fucking, I've had shin splints for like 15 years. And you guys seem to think that's fine.
Yeah. And I talked to a source who was debating on whether they needed to get on like medication for depression, and their recruiter told them don't get on that shit, basically. Yeah. We want you in the military and we'll make you sad. Don't come here sad already. Yeah, it was wait until you graduate basic, then get on your depressants, right? Yeah. Like don't have that. Wait until after MEPS, right?
Absolutely, go through basic training completely unmedicated. You should absolutely be raw dogging reality while you go through basic training.
So the military wants someone that's never stubbed their toe or took a pill or smoked marijuana or it isn't fat and has no criminal background and has a high school diploma or GED. They want like the 19-year-old that barely exists, and that's the recruiting problem. It's not vaccines. It's not people like woke stuff or whatever Tucker Carlson's complaining about right now.
Once again, much like the army does, it's them shooting themselves in their own foot and not realizing it. And I understand why they want Genesis, but I really feel like there should be a lot of things that are loosened up for that, because telling people to not join the army because they have mental health problems, like what? You have to have mental health problems to join the army. Like, I can only imagine. Like, yeah, I really think it's a good idea to sign paperwork to allow a grown man to yell at me for 4 years.
What's he want to do? 11 Bravo? Oh, he got a bar fight. Oh, come here, buddy. Yeah, he's what I need. Come here.
Yeah, exactly. How did he do in that? Did he win in the bar fight? Cool. You're a sergeant now. Guess what?
Yeah, most qualified.
Exactly. Promote above peers. Steve, thank you so much for coming on and talking. Probably going to be my last show with you this year, but looking forward to bringing you back on next year to continue to talk about how the Army is, fucking themselves over.
I'm always down for it. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you for everybody listening. We'll talk to you next week.